questions remain over Wednesday's deadly air collision, but new reporting from The Lever reveals that lawmakers were warned of safety issues months before the January 29th fatal crash.
Still, Congress passed a measure to add more flights to Reagan National Airport, which was already one of the most congested airports in the country. The report highlights that lawmakers eager to have easier access flying directly to and from Washington and their home states were all in, including the newly minted Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy. But those opposing cited the, quote, already stressed by flight volume in the capital region's busy airspace.
Joining us now to dig into their report is David Sirota, founder and editor-in-chief of The Lever. David, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Sure. So give us an overview of some of the safety concerns that were taking place at DCA. This is obviously a very busy airport. You also have multiple military helicopter routes that run right next to one of the runways there at that airport. What concerns had been raised in the past?
So Washington National Airport is one of the airports in the country, relatively few airports, that's right inside the city, right near the city center. People might know Burbank Airport, San Diego Airport. These were airports they're older airports that were built right near the city center. And so it's always been a place where there have been concerns about too much traffic coming into air traffic coming into the airport. And this has been a debate going on when it comes to Washington National Airport really for decades, that there have been limits on the amount of flights that can come into Washington National Airport because of its smaller runways, its smaller mass, its smaller land area, and its proximity to the city. For years, there has been this debate every time the FAA reauthorization bills come up about whether to add slots to National Airport, whether to add more air traffic, and whether to allow longer flights to come into Washington National Airport. There's this perimeter issue, a perimeter meaning how far away can the flights come? So, transcontinental airplanes and the like. Safety concerns have been sounded over and over again about this airport in particular, about how there's too much traffic there. And in the last go-around of the FAA reauthorization, which took place in 2023 and 2024, the local members of Congress from Virginia in particular were really, really concerned about adding even more flights. Previous FAA reauthorizations had added more flights despite these warnings. The lawmakers were under pressure by, for instance, one group that ran ads, one group supported by and membership of Delta Airlines. Members of Congress who were supported by the airlines that wanted to add more flights there, they pushed forward a bill to add more flights. The local lawmakers from Virginia said, please no, there are real safety concerns here. People like Tim Kaine, Mark Warner. The bill was actually voted down in the House, but it was slipped back into the final large FAA reauthorization bill. And so flights were added, or at least were on the way to being added at this airport, not reduced as critics had asked for, and here we are.
And I think it is worth crediting some of the people that you have mentioned. Tim Kaine, also former Senator Ben Cardin, who was serving at the time, was one of the people who was very critical of this push for more slots. But as you say, their point of view ultimately did not prevail because of this maneuver where it was embedded within the broader FAA authorization measure. Talk a little bit more, if you can, David, about the influence of the airlines and the broader industry that was pushing for this to be passed, presumably for profit reasons primarily.
Well, to be clear, in some ways, the airlines were split. There were certain airlines that wanted to get more routes in there. I mentioned Delta as one of the keys. There were other airlines that were ambivalent. There were some airlines that at times were opposed, United Airlines. But look, there was a push by the larger aviation industry wanted more flights in here. Now, it's worth mentioning it's really important to mention. Washington, D.C. is also served by Dulles Airport, which is farther out and has a lot more capacity. The opponents of doing what was done were basically arguing that members of Congress were trying to get themselves more convenient flights into the airport that's much closer to the city. That the idea is that the members of Congress from districts farther away wanted direct flights into the most convenient airport for themselves to get to their offices, despite the safety warnings. So it's important to know that it's not like the only way to get into Washington, D.C. was Washington National Airport, this airport that really is in a special geographical situation, airspace situation. There's BWI, there's Dulles Airport. So the allegation from the opponents was the members of Congress who are pushing this are brushing off safety concerns because they want a slightly easier commute to their office from the airport. And I think it's really kind of disturbing that that was out in the discourse and the safety warnings were ignored. And let me add, you mentioned that it's not just that National Airport is near the city center and is a relatively smaller facility than, let's say, Dulles Airport. It's also, as you alluded to, it's in some of the most complex airspace in the world, right? With the government, the Pentagon there, the White House, et cetera, Black Hawk helicopter routes. So adding capacity, despite this complex airspace and these dire warnings, I think it's really important to look at what that debate was all about when something like this happens, to ask, were there warnings that were missed, that were ignored, that created the conditions for something to happen? And I should mention one other thing. There were a bunch of near misses on the runway, near miss collisions on the runway in the middle of this legislative debate about whether to add air traffic to Washington National.
Right. And David, one of the things that I'm hearing is that this route that the military helicopter was flying is also often flown by parts of the Marine One fleet that carries the President of the United States. I mean, do we have any indication that this particular route has been under investigation, or is your reporting sort of limited to Reagan National?
Yeah, our reporting is basically about what potential conditions existed before this situation. But look, again, it's some of the most complex and trafficked airspace in the world for obvious reasons. And so I think it's important to ask what decisions were made to take an already stressed, smallish airport and put it under even more stress. Now, there's also questions about whether the tower was staffed properly, the air traffic control system. And there have been serious shortages of air traffic controllers for years in the lead up to this situation. Now, do we know that definitively was at play in this situation? I don't think we do. But all of these questions are important to raise now because they've been raised in the lead up to this situation. And I think we have to always be looking at what decisions were made before situations like this happened, what warnings went unheeded, so that similar decisions aren't made necessarily in the future.
David Sirota of The Lever, important reporting there, and thanks for joining us to discuss it.
Thanks to both of you.
Up next, Rising is speaking to an inspector general who was fired by President Trump last week. Stick around.